That's okay.
That doesn't spot.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Karina, and thanks for the library in organizing and holding cultural days. And thank you to Maggie Jasaitis for organizing this Beatnik Café. Is that how you call it? Beatnik
Hippie-Beatnik.
Hippie-Beatnik Café. What inspired you to come up with this?
What inspires
Yeah.
me? I consider myself to be a bit of a hippie beatnik.
Good stuff.
I think freedom of speech is definitely
All right.
coming from hippie beatniks.
Good. So I think one of the things that I try to do with my own writing and also with my publishing house, Northern Voices Publication, which has published Modern Postmodern, or Mapopamo. This is the first book, but we're also working on a second book by Bill Shaver that's going to be called Shavings from the Heart, hopefully out before Christmas, is that it's important to express yourself. I think self-expression is very important to our health. It's a way of maintaining a livable and civilized society as well. So, with that being said, I'm going to read a couple of poems from my second book, which is called Arrivederci Plastic Covered Couch, which is basically about the immigrant experience of people like myself, and many of the people from the Timmins area I think have also been immigrants as well. So although it takes place in Toronto, it also resonates with people who've come from elsewhere. The first poem I'm going to read is called Dufferin Street, from Arrivederci Plastic Covered Couch. And Dufferin Street, as many of you who have been to Toronto know, it's a street that goes from Lake Ontario beyond the Steel Avenue border of Greater Toronto, and it peters out someplace north of there.
And
Dufferin
it
Street.
goes to the CNE.
Well, that's right. Right by the lake is the CNE, and it also goes by Canada's Wonderland. Listening to the sawing sound of those ancient cicadas through Toronto's summer heat, leaning against American cars whose fins were as sharp as shark's teeth, the magical word Dufferin would reverberate through my brain and work its way to my mouth and tongue that uttered Dufferin. And my friends and I would laugh at this absurd English word. Dufferin Street was mothers shepherding us to Dufferin Plaza for clothes. And across the street was Dufferin Park and fun, oh boy, and the playground just over the hill, which seemed so big back then. And sometimes the ice cream truck would come by. Yum! Dufferin Street had this magical bus that took us to the exhibition where we squealed, holding on for our lives on shaky roller coasters. Dufferin Street was my family dressing up on Sunday, taking the bus north to St. Clair, and wondering if it would make it up the Davenport Hill on the way to visit cousins, uncles, aunts. Dufferin Street was ugly, with peeling houses covered with dusty auto exhaust, but it was our ticket out of our sleepy, charmed College Street village. Dufferin Street was the perspiration rolling off tired faces, and we rode that sweat along Highway 401, Quattrocento e Uno. We rode it, and we saw the world stretched out before us. Dufferin, buffrin, suffrin, succotash. We shouted out, have a headache? And like little scruffy sparrows we replied, take a Dufferin. Need new clothes? Take the Buffrin bus to Suffrin Plaza. And we laughed at the sounds of this chameleon language was slowly changing into our own. So that's really a sense of what it felt to me growing up and learning a new language. I was 4 years old when I came over, and words seemed kind of weird, like Dufferin really sounded, weird. And
What does Dufferin mean? Where does it come from?
it comes from English. There was a Lord Dufferin.
Oh, okay.
But of course my folks would always put an O in it, so Dufferin quickly became Dufferino. Dufferino, Santa Clara. In those days, we had a rag man that came up and down the streets, and I grew up, prior to 1965, I lived on a small street called Delaware, in what was then known as the west end of Toronto. Now seems to be more like the central part of the city as it expanded. And all I could make out from this guy is he would come along with his old horse with a wagon behind him, and it actually was like a really first type of recycling. And he would yell out, what sounded to me, ariku. Now he could be say arigoyo, which means I'm here to collect your junk. But to me it sounded like ariku. And I was often trying to wonder, is that Yiddish? Is it French? Is it Canadian? It wasn't Canadian. It didn't sound Italian. It sounded something gypsy-ish, maybe because of the horse. In those days, oh yeah, we never saw horses except when this guy came by. In those days, when westerns were the rage on TV, I watched them all, though there were no real horses to be seen in my neighborhood, except for the one that pulled an old wagon that came by once in a while. From my second-story bedroom, on a drowsy summer vacation day, I could hear the clip-clop, 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 and the odd sound of a wagon wheel on asphalt. From the street below arose a Paul Robeson voice, crooning, "Areku, Areku," followed by a chorus of screen doors slamming, accompanied by the excited voices of babysitting aunts, spinster neighbors, calling at the Areku man to stop, and he pulled the reins of his aged nag until it came to a halt. From my upstairs window, I saw the widow Antonella carry down a sack of her dead husband's clothes and a crippled chair. The spinster Anne, with her broken mirrors and torn dresses, gave them to the Areku man, who would make them new again. And when the Areku man got his fill, he snapped his reins and brought his suffering nag to life like a weary cowboy, searching for that lost passage, calling out his mournful, "Areku, Areku." And the funny thing is, not too many people remember it.
Latin.
It could be Latin. The only guy that remembers it is Mike Filey. He's a historian. He's written a number of books on Toronto history. And I actually dedicated this to the front of this book to the only other person I've ever talked to who remembers this guy.
The ragman.
The ragman.
No photographs, see?
Oh, that's sad.
What's that? No, I didn't have a camera back then. I was only about 7 or 8.
You got to page him. Yeah, but maybe the city of Toronto.
You know what? I'm going to go to the
Your
archives.
archives.
I like going to the archives. Okay. So what I'm going to do,
You need a
if I have
license
time,
to
is
sell the rags. So you
read
register.
one more from this collection. I haven't read it in a while. And I just want to read this because there's a lot of talk about immigration these days. And people forget that when Italians came over in the 50s, there were a lot of problems. There were a lot of shooting, a lot of violence. And no one ever tried to keep us out of the country. So I think people got to remember that every successive generation of immigration has its own
Frank, we got
problems.
kicked out of the country. So
And I've talked to a lot of people who came over as immigrants who now all of a sudden want to keep out Muslims and other people because they say they're too violent. This is a story called St. Clair Avenue Was a Blast. And what happened is that a ne'er-do-well property owner tried to collect insurance, blew up the building he owned, and destroyed St. Clair Travel Agency. The scene looked like a war scene, and I do have photographs of this.
When would that be?
1972. The bombs that dropped in 1972 fell in Vietnam, Jerusalem, and Northern Ireland, except for the one that rocked St. Clair in the early morning as I slept. But now, with sirens screaming, I woke up to the dire radio transmissions. Massive blast rocks Little Italy. Cleaner dies a dirty death. Later that day, I walked to that scene amid the rubble. My mind flashed to the Sunday walks to the La Paloma ice cream store. Would a gelato taste the same now that death sprinkles away? The Pasquale brothers' grocery truck that delivered our food lay covered with bricks, wood, broken glass. How would we eat? With the cleaner killed, who would clean up this dirty deed?
Take out. That's good.
And that was one of many. I mean, we could talk about the construction violence and everything
Well,
else.
you must have been about 14 years old then.
72,
Young
I
lad.
was 15. Sorry,
I was 21.
I was 17. I was 17.
Okay. Yeah.
And I had a camera then.
And I'm thinking, did I work in Toronto? Did I work for Sears?
It was terrible. It was really nasty.
I lived
Okay.
on Madison Street.
Yeah, I know what that is, yeah.
What were the honest heads?
That's right.
You know?
Any
Madison.
homework or?
One more?
Okay.
Nice meeting you.
Did you want to, if I'm reading too long, just let me know.
No.
And I did write my grade 13 English literature on Lawrence Ferlinghetti and the Beat movement. So there's always been
In your blood.
something that has really appealed to me. And I'm glad that people have, and you've organized this, because I thought it was a very, very
Good theme.
incredible time, and a time of great compassion, caring. Ferlinghetti, before he opened up in San Francisco, he was from Brooklyn, Italian Jewish father, Portuguese Jewish mother, and he was a captain on a vessel during World War II, and you might be interested in knowing this because the week after the bomb was dropped in Nagasaki, he went a week later on a surveillance ship to find out what was happening. And I think this was probably what dedicated his life to peace. And he moved from Brooklyn to San Francisco, opened up the bookstore that grew all these young kids. He was 20 years older than most of them. And he's 96 years old, and he's outlived pretty well all of them.
So he's still around them.
Yep,
He's still alive.
Yeah.
And he lives in New York.
Where is he living?
San Francisco.
San
Oh my
Francisco.
God.
And
Wow.
his name was again?
Lawrence Ferlinghetti,
And I bet you he's sharp too.
the owner of the City Light bookstore, the legendary one.
We gotta go meet him, Frank.
That would
I
be,
actually I dedicated this book to him, and I got in contact with his publicist, and I did mail him a copy of this. So.
Well, you
Hopefully
never
yes.
know. You never know.
Yeah. Okay, this is called O No So Talo. And this word always reminded me of something very holy. It sounded like when my mom said, O Nostro Signore, O No So Talo. But it's Portuguese, and I didn't understand what it meant. So this is a walk along Bloor Street. O Nostro Signore, O Nuestra Madre, O Notre Dieu, O No So Talo. Oh, this world of ours, built minute by minute on this sizzling summer sidewalk at the dawning of nightfall on Bloor Street West, displaying a parade of fleshy humanity, baked by the rising heat from the concrete and black top, like steam from a boiling pot. There is the street musician named Ray Cool, cashing in his quarters.
You use my name. You use my, Frank.
At Korean convenience store. We'll edit it out.
I want my shekels.
No, I'm just
I know you're joking.
That is selling, and at the Korean convenience store, that's selling wasted cherries. My feet march on to see a beggar begging for dollars, while two blondes with wild hair drive by, flashing their ample breasts from the front seat of a white Mercedes convertible, and give the finger to the bum who would love to finger them. My eyes conspire to form a layer cake of free association that stitched together twisted combinations and permutations. A blue-eyed woman selling halal meats, a wispy, waspy youth roasting corn at the Somalian grocery store where once stood the Calabrese grocery store 1 billion hours ago. Down the block I see a Hurricane's bar, and I want a beer, but I think of Hurricane Katrina, destructive Katrina, all that destruction, all the deaths, all the suffering humanity. Do I dare indulge in a beer and mock their suffering? But I really want a beer, so I think of Hurricane Reuben Carter and imagine his first act of freedom, quenching his thirst with a cold glass of beer after being rightfully released, an innocent man released of guilt. I march to Hurricane and I order a tall one from the waitress with the best thighs in town and watch from her the wooden bar as she gets higher and higher as her pink hand grips the wooden draft handle shaft down. Down goes the beer. I stumble to the sidewalk and watch a stout man mincing with a yippy-yappy poodly dog wearing a pooch-sized string of pearls, while he promenades in a black G-string and high heels. His eyes dare me to laugh, so he could find pleasure in ramming his throat into my fist. Oh, no so tallow, oh, this world of ours, with futile dreams, desperate schemes. A husband loudly berates his woman for being such a slut. Two women kissing in the shadow of Zoink's bookstore across from St. Anthony's Church at their 100th anniversary celebration, where Scalabrinian priests seek physical release in the sounds of the organ's song. And youthful angels that grace stained glass windows and confessional boxes. O nostro Signore, O nostra Madre, O notre Dieu, O no so talo. So a no so talo, I finally looked it up in the Portuguese dictionary,
Our Lord.
is a Portuguese butcher shop. It's a meat shop.
Because you use the French terminology,
Yeah.
and you make people think that it's the same thing. But
Exactly.
It's not.
But it's not. Oh no so talo is a butcher
Yeah.
shop. Anyways, that's Mopopomo, and thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's
Okay, if
educational.
Karina wanted to do anything, this
Okay.
is it.
All right, well, I was here, I was actually playing with my haiku, so what this is, and hopefully we'll get a chance, maybe we can do this as another event, but set of cubes with words on them, and there's